As Nikki Haley said, the race for the Republican nomination is down to one fella and one lady. And Haley's performance today in New Hampshire's primary could have big implications for her bid for the presidency. Trump is leading polls in the Granite State and collecting endorsements from former opponents. Kirsten Kukowski is an advisor to a Nikki Haley super PAC. She's with us now from New Hampshire to talk a little bit about today's primary. Kristen, you know, I've heard kind of this contest being characterized in two different ways. Some people say it's do or die for Nikki Haley, that, you know, the way she shows here will be an indication as to whether or not she will have the momentum to continue going to South Carolina and then beyond. Others have said it's two states. They're not even the biggest states with the largest population. Let's not read too much into it. How do you see this contest?
I see it more as the latter. Even after tonight, less than about 1% of the last primaries electorate will have voted. So I think it's much too early to coronate Donald Trump as the nominee. And I think either way, you'll be seeing another month of this race in South Carolina, which is Nikki's home state, and was another open primary. So I think that it's important tonight to have the voters have a voice. It's the second state in the process, and we're really happy with where things are today. We already had a successful week knocking Ron DeSantis out of the race. So just another night, but it's going to be a good one.
So in hard numbers, what would you consider a win for Nikki Haley tonight in New Hampshire?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of talk about what that win looks like. I think that if you had said that we would have gotten 20 points in Iowa and I would assume that we were going to, nearly double that and be within a striking distance of Donald Trump tonight. I think people would have called that a win, just before Christmas. So I think that tonight, again, we've already had a big win this week. I think we're going to have another one showing that we're in a head-to-head race with Donald Trump, and then it's going to be on to South Carolina.
So, as you know, there's a significant number of undeclared voters, and it's been characterized that undeclared voters are leaning towards Nikki Haley. I don't know if that's true, and we'll see, when the votes are counted. But why do you think that among undeclared voters, Nikki Haley has appeal?
Yeah, and I think that historically, the GOP nominees have relied on independent, undeclared, unaffiliated voters. And I think in 2016, Donald Trump reaped the benefits of those voters. I think now they've turned to Nikki Haley. And I think the reason is you see some polling where you see the 75% of Americans don't want a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I think those same voters are now coming out to the Republican primary to say, we want a different choice. And we want Nikki Haley to face Joe Biden. And you see that in her polling numbers. Donald Trump's own pollster has her up leads of 17 points over the president. And so I think that's why that electorate is really important. And I think that they're going to come out for Nikki Haley tonight, and they're going to continue to do so in South Carolina and several of the Super Tuesday states in early March.
So how do you see her path to the nomination after New Hampshire? And if she does not, I mean, if you just look at the polling, and I, for one, am not ever bound to the polling because things can change. But right now, the polling suggests in South Carolina that Donald Trump is way, way, way ahead. What would the path to the nomination look like if she loses in South Carolina and goes on to Super Tuesday? And the reason I ask that is because if you agree that, and we've been talking about this, that the people who support the former president are diehard supporters. I mean, their minds are already made up. Even our own polling has shown that we keep talking about these independents, but most people who are either for Donald Trump or for Nikki Haley or even Democrats in the state have already made up their minds about what they're going to do. Wouldn't you like to see her take on the president just more forcefully? You're not going to win those Trump supporters over. So what do you have to lose?
Well, but remember, 50% of the Iowa caucus electorate voted for Donald Trump. 50% of one of the most conservative states in the country voted for Donald Trump. that doesn't mean that he has any sort of mandate on this party. There are a lot of Republican voters left. There's also independent voters left. And so when you ask about her path to victory, it is, having a good night here in New Hampshire, continuing to be within striking distance of Donald Trump, which she is going to be, moving to her home state where there is an entire month between today and the South Carolina, contest. And a month is an eternity in politics. We know that. And these contests have a tendency to compound on each other, right? So her 20-point win that was not expected in Iowa is now going to grow in New Hampshire, which is going to grow in South Carolina. And then you start looking at Michigan, another open primary where the electorate's going to be larger. And then you start looking beyond that into Super Tuesday, where 11 of 16 states have open or semi-open primaries. And so there is definitely a path. It is way, way too soon to say that this contest is over. And I know that the media wants to look at the national polls and say, okay, this thing is over and coronate Donald Trump, but there are still 50% of the GOP plus independent unaffiliated voters who want a say in this, and Nikki's going to give that to them.
All right, Kirsten Kukowski, thank you so much. Good luck tonight.
Thank you.